Although Grace said that he was her little brother, in the morning, he felt that he had to see it for himself before he could rest assured. The car arrived at the gate of a community of apartment buildings. The landscaping was sparse, and while the buildings appeared clean and well maintained, there was no defeating that the residences were old. Sean parked, got out of the car, tiled through the footpath for visitors, and washed the spendy boots. After some effort, he finally stopped in front of a narrow door. Was Grace really living here? The unit was so small, he wondered if it was nothing more than a snowstorm, and the paint was chippety from the door through peeling from the window shutters. Sean was about to knock on the door when he heard hell steps. Subconscious he had in the shadow you'd sawed and hooked in the direction which the hot steps were coming from. It turned out that there was a tall figure coming toward him. As the figure got closer and closer, seat as man grew wide him, Ted widened. The occasional speculation that there was ads by pub future impossible had finally become a possible. Chapter 61. It was Jason. It was really Jason. There was no way it was just a resemblance. It was absolutely impossible for them to look this similar. At this moment, Jason's clothes were still the same as the ones he had seen yesterday. Why is Jason here? Sean felt a chill rising from the soles of his feet, and his body was getting colder and colder. Finally, Jason stood in front of the narrow door that Sean had come to and raised his hand to gently knock. A moment later, someone opened the door and said, "You're back." The soft voice and sweet smile belonged to Grace. His Grace. Sean only felt a breath get stuck in his throat, and he stood there, not breathing and motionless. After a minute, he rubbed his eyes and sucked a deep breath. Why? How? Even seeing it with his own eyes, he could still scarcely believe it. The person who opened the door was Grace. Chapter 61. Grace is actually living together with Jason. What is going on? And why is Jason dressed like a homeless person? Too many questions flashed through his mind. Then, he heard Jason say, "I'm back." Sean had heard Jason's voice before, and the voice was the same as the one in his memory. At this point in time, Sean had no doubt that the man he'd seen with Grace that he was seeing with her now was Jason Reed. Just as Jason was about to enter the room, his steps suddenly paused. He looked towards the dark corner where Sean was hiding. In an instant, Sean felt that all the blood in his body had stopped flowing, and he froze like an animal in the sight of a much larger predator. "Jay, what are you looking at?" Grace's voice sounded again. "It's nothing." Jason's lips curled slightly into a smile. Then, he walked into the apartment. With a bang, the door was closed. Sean took a deep breath. His palms and back were already covered with cold sweat. He felt as if he had just escaped death. What was going on? Why was Jason together with Grace? Sean walked out of the apartment complex with no strength in his legs and returned to his car. However, when he wanted to start driving, he found that his hands were shaking violently. Looking at how Grace has been getting along with Jason, it seemed like they were already very familiar with each other. Furthermore, Grace had called Jason Jay. In all the years of doing business together, Sean still referred to him as Mr. Reed. He had never heard anyone call him so intimate. Sean continued to repeat in his mind the scene he'd encountered at the apartment. Jason's attitude toward Grace could only be described as gentle. But that didn't make sense. Mr. Reed was not gentle. The man was all ice. Jason Reed had never been gentle to a woman. Not even Jennifer Atkinson, his fiancée, had been treated with such reverence. Sean recalled the cold interactions between the couple, and even Lily mentioned that their marriage was one of convenience and for business. Suddenly, the matter of the engagement advertisement being taken down flashed across Sean's mind. Previously, they had always thought that it was because of Grace. They thought that Jason hated the Stevens family because of her and did not like seeing the Stevens family proposing in such a high-profile way. But thinking about it, it was indeed because of Grace. However, the motive behind the action was completely different from what they had originally thought it was. In the apartment, Grace was having a meal with Jason. It was the quiet time of the day that they looked forward to. The point where they ate and chatted and spent time together before they would go to sleep. Grace also told him about what had happened at the sanitation service center. I don't know why, but the director actually fired Farah for picking on me. I thought ads by Pub Future would be the one getting dismissed. Isn't that good? Jason asked. Grace said with some hesitation, of course, I'm okay with it since I've not been fired, but I don't know if Farah will take revenge on me. After all, Farah had been about to hit her before Chase interceded. She can't do anything, Jason said. As for Farah Steele, he would naturally help Grace solve any lurking issues. The thing on his mind was that someone was hiding in the dark outside. Although he had not seen the person's appearance clearly, if he had guessed correctly, it was probably Sean. Last night at the intersection, Sean must have seen that he was with Grace, so he had come to seek confirmation. Do you like living with me like this? Jason asked. Grace did not hesitate as she replied, of course I do. Then even if I were to change my identity in the future, would you still be willing to live with me? He asked, staring at her with his deep eyes. She blinked in confusion. To change his identity, was he referring to someone other than a homeless person? Her friend, Lena, had always said that she knew too little about him and was afraid that she would be taken advantage of. As for her, she had never asked him about his identity. In fact, she only knew the name, Jay. Other than that, she only knew that he did not have any family members. Lena said that he didn't seem like a homeless man. Sometimes, Grace also felt the same way. But if he didn't want to tell her, she wouldn't take the initiative to ask. After all, everyone had his or her own secrets. I'd be willing to, she said gently. No matter what kind of status I have, will you be willing to accept me? He asked again. Jason's gaze was intense. He had supported her, protected her, defended her. Even knowing about her past. Would she judge him or accept him? There was no question for her. Yes, no matter what, okay. She smiled and said, eat quickly or else the food will go cold. He also smiled, his lips rising in a crooked smile that was a little smug. She was in a trance and felt that his smile was too beautiful and that no other smile could beat it. She turned back to her food and pushed the thoughts away. Her brother might be hot, but as his sister, she'd be wise not to think of him in that way. Babe, what do you think? In the dress store, Lily was wearing a high-end gown tailor-made for her. This gown had been specially made for the engagement banquet and it had cost $500,000. Could he see the point in spending so much on a few bits of cloth and beads? No, but she could and her family did, and like everything that marked the start of their relationship, it was about appearances. And sparing no expense illustrated how committed the Atkinsons were to this engagement. Sean looked at the noble and beautiful woman in front of him. Everyone envied him for having such a girlfriend. She was a popular television star and the daughter of the Atkinson family. After the death of Jennifer Atkinson, Lily had become the only heir. Marrying Lily was equivalent to getting into the Atkinson family. You look beautiful, Lily, Sean told her. He was very satisfied with himself, and he even looked forward to the engagement party. But at this moment, when he looked at his girlfriend wearing such a gorgeous dress, what Sean was thinking about in his mind was the scene from last night and Jason and Grace's faces. Had Jason seen him? There had been a second where Jason stared knowingly into the darkness. Had all of that really happened? Even at this moment, Sean felt that everything he had seen last night was like a dream. Could it really be that the most powerful and influential and wealthy man in the entire city was slumming it with his ex-fiancée who'd murdered Jason Reed's first love? And got convicted for it. In what world was this even possible? Looking at her fiancé's absent-minded expression, Lily frowned. What's wrong with you? You have been zoning out a lot in the last 2 days. If you don't want to get engaged to me, just say it. Sean sighed and then quickly smiled and said, of course not. Why wouldn't I want to get engaged to you? You know that my heart is only for you. Only for me. Lily raised an eyebrow. You really have no more feelings for Grace. Ads by Pub Future. N. Sean's body stiffened slightly. Lily was sharp. And she could be cruel. He said uncomfortably, why did you mention her again? I broke up with her years ago. How could I still have feelings for her? Well then why did you want to help her find a job before? She asked. I just pity her, Sean replied. What is there to pity about her? You should pity my sister. Because of Grace, she lost her life, Lily snorted coldly. If you dare to pity her again when Jason Reed looks for you in the future, you'd better not blame our family for not supporting you. Sean's reaction was a bit delayed as he thought through all the possible scenarios for his ex and her new acquaintance. Before, he wouldn't have thought that there was anything wrong with his current girlfriend's words. But now, the existence of Grace might not be all it seemed. After hesitating for a while, he said tentatively, Lily, do you know if Jason has gotten involved with a new woman recently? Of course not, Lily immediately denied. Jason is notorious for keeping his distance from women. He's as cold as ice and it was a miracle that Jennifer thawed his cold heart and that she presented the only suitable partner for marriage. From the way she said it, it was obvious that Lily too saw the former engagement to her sister as nothing more than a strategic alliance between two wealthy families. Jason Reed has not had any other women for the past 3 years. It was for this reason that the outside world thought that Jason loved her sister deeply, but only the Atkinson family knew that it was not the case. But the Atkinson family would not take the initiative to expose that kind of misunderstanding. On the contrary, they even hoped that others would misunderstand more. It upped their value. Under the umbrella of the Reed family, the Atkinson family could get more benefits from them all. Sean heard Lily's words and said nothing more. When the two of them had finished trying on their clothes and walked out of the dress shop, a car drove up in front of the two. Sean and Lily both knew the person who got it. It was Jason's personal secretary, Terence Klein. Secretary Klein, why are you here? Lily asked curiously. But Sean was stiff, and there was a hunch in his heart. Terence smiled slightly. I am here to invite Mr. Stevens to a meeting. Then, his eyes turned to Sean. Mr. Stevens, Mr. Reed, wants to see you. His hunch was correct. Sean exhaled a long breath. Okay, I'll go see Mr. Reed with you. He didn't reflect on how Terence knew exactly where they were or how he'd timed it perfectly to intercept them as they left the store. Babe, what's going on? Lily demanded. Sean started toward the car. We will discuss it, if it pertains to you when I come back. After he'd finished speaking, he got into the car with Terence. Lily sputtered, but what could she say? The invitation had been clear and extended only to him. Sean settled into the car and did not look back. As Terence pulled into traffic, Sean asked haltingly, Secretary Klein, do you know why Mr. Reed wants to meet me? Terence met his gaze in the rearview mirror. You are about to find out. Sean cleared his throat. What manner of business is this pertaining to? Sean tried again. Terence said with a faint smile, you will know when you meet Mr. Reed. Sean undid the top button of his shirt. He was warm and getting more and more anxious. The car stopped at the door of the Reed residence. Sean followed Terence into the house and saw Jason sitting on the sofa, playing with an invitation card in his hand. When Sean approached, he saw that the invitation was for the engagement banquet that he and Lily had invited Jason to. "We meet again," Jason said faintly. Sean was stunned. At this moment, Jason was wearing an elegant grey-blue suit. His hair was combed and tied back, showing his smooth forehead. The man had strong, even features, and while Sean wasn't one to normally pay too much attention to another man's good looks, it was impossible not to see Jason Reed and think that he was exceptional. And it wasn't just the bone structure or the expression, Jason Reed radiated power. The kind of quiet, absolute confidence that told anyone in the room with him that he held all the cards and called all the shots. His smile now was lazy, but every bit arrogant. Ads by Pub Future. It was no surprise that he attracted the attention of so many women. In the upper circles, many young ladies tried their best to attract Jason, not only because of his background but also due to his appearance. However, when Jason's dark eyes took in Sean, Sean had the distinct sensation of being stared at by a wild beast. His blood seemed to have frozen again, and even his breathing became ragged. It was just like the feeling of being stared at by that person last night. But yesterday, he had been in the dark while Jason had been out in the open. At that time, he had been able to see Jason, but Jason Reed should not have been able to see him clearly. But now, he was completely exposed to Jason's line of sight. Sean smiled dryly. Yes, he was trying to guess if Jason's, again, was actually referring to last night, but then Jason Reed went and answered the question for him. "Did you mention what happened last night to someone else?" Jason asked in a careless manner. A careless manner that was anything but. Sean felt the threat as if it had been thrown out by the lip of a sword. His hands trembled and his heart pounded. Sean was frightened. Sure enough, this visit was because of what happened last night. Although Sean already had a hunch, when he heard Jason ask in person, some of his doubts finally came to an end. He realized abruptly that Jason Reed was indeed the man he'd seen holding Grace at the intersection. He was the man visiting Grace at her low-income housing. He was the man in ragged clothes with unkempt hair. And he was the same man, standing before him now. So in the end, Jason and Grace were indeed together. "I asked you a question," Jason reminded him quietly. "No, I didn't mention it to anyone," Sean said. "That's good," Jason said. "I don't want anyone else to know about this." Sean swallowed past the lump in his throat. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know what Jason Reed wanted. But if Jason wanted his arrangement, whatever it was, with Grace kept a secret, then the fact that Sean knew of it would not bode well for him. He felt that his whole body was being crushed by the pressure in the room. "Also, I don't wish to see you there again. I don't care why you were there or what you were doing. But since you chose to break up with Grace back then, don't come and look for her anymore. Is that clear?" Jason asked. Sean was rendered speechless with shock. Jason's tone sounded threatening, but what was more confusing was the hint of possessiveness wrapped up in the words. Like Jason Reed wanted Grace, all to himself. Could it be that Jason actually has feelings for Grace? Sean couldn't believe it. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end. Just thinking about it. "I understand," Sean said with some difficulty. "All right, then you can go. Terence, send Mr. Stevens back," Jason ordered. Terence gave an affirmative nod. When Sean was about to leave, he couldn't help but ask, "Mr. Reed, what is it between Grace and you?" The cold glint in Jason's dark eyes sent shivers down Sean's spine. "What gave you the impression you were permitted to ask questions?" Terence remarked. "When you shouldn't ask something, don't." Terrence's shoulder nudged Sean toward the door. Beneath his breath, he muttered, "How can you not understand this, Mr. Stevens?" Sean's face went pale and he left feeling embarrassed. That one question could have been a serious misstep on his behalf. Sweat beaded on his brow as Terrence opened his car door. Jason leaned against the back of the sofa and took out a cheap mobile phone. There was only one number in the contacts list. He pressed that number. After a while, a gentle female voice sounded from the other end of the phone. "Sister," he said slowly. "What do you want to eat for dinner?" "I'll bring it back for you," he said softly. The coldness in his eyes was replaced with tenderness. At night, Grace was wiping the photo frame that held her mother's photo with a paper towel. She had gone to buy a small desk just to house this photo, and she made it a point to dust it every few days. All of her mother's belongings had been left with the Cummins family. This photo was the only item she had left with which to reminisce about her mother. Ads by Pub Future. As she wiped the photo frame, Jason sat to one side, looking at her quietly. "Oh, right, Jay. It's almost Thanksgiving. Do you have a bus ticket?" Grace asked. In the past 2 days, many of her colleagues from the sanitation service center had been struggling to get tickets for the journey back home to celebrate Thanksgiving with their families. "No, I don't have a ticket." "Okay," Grace said. She nodded once. "I can pick one up for you tomorrow." Jason's brows drew together as he suddenly realized what she was trying to ask. "I don't need to buy any tickets. You don't have to go home," she asked in surprise. "Aside from here, I don't have a home." Even though he had stayed in the Reed residence for so many years, he had never felt at home there. She then remembered how he had said that he had no family, but didn't people normally have relatives or something? People would usually go visit their relatives during the holidays. When she voiced her doubts, he smiled faintly and said, "I do have some relatives, but I don't need to go around visiting them." As for the old head of the Reed family, although they were grandfather and grandson, family affection was something that didn't exist in the Reed family. The only thing that his grandfather was interested in was an heir. As long as he was good enough and powerful enough, grandfather wouldn't care about anything else. But if he ever disappointed the family, even if he was grandfather's grandson, he would still be kicked out. What's more, half of the blood in his body came from that woman's. It could be said grandfather even felt disgust for him because of it. He remembered how when he was a child, grandfather had looked at him in disgust several times and said with a ferocious expression, "Why do you have that woman's blood in your body? You shouldn't exist at all." At that time, Jason had been beaten by his grandfather many times already. The infractions ranged from a less than perfect score on a school test to speaking out of turn. It was only after he had grown up and begun to show his capabilities in the boardroom that grandfather's attitude towards him had slowly changed. However, the fact that he had that woman's blood in him was a fact that could not be changed. Grace hesitated for a moment and could not help but ask, "What about your parents?" "They are." Jason's face changed slightly. He looked at her with his extremely beautiful eyes. It seemed that his eyes were covered with a layer of silk, making no one able to see what he was thinking at the moment. Grace bit her lip. "If you don't want to tell me, just pretend that I didn't ask." "Would you really like to know?" He countered, his voice carrying a hint of unintended coldness. Grace twisted her hands together. It was one of her tells, when she was nervous. Her fingers pained her a lot, he knew, so when she did that, she was usually feeling especially anxious. "Why do you ask, Grace?" Her big, pretty eyes batted up to his. "I just wanted to know more about you. However, if you don't want to talk about these things, then let's not talk about them. In any case, the past isn't important." We just need to look ahead, right? He appreciated her giving him an out. But that was Grace, wasn't it? Always thinking of others before herself. My father died. The day you met me was my father's death anniversary. On that day, he died in the spot where I was sitting by the road. Grace was stunned. She had not been expecting the place where she met Jay to be the place where her father had passed away. I'm so sorry, she said. He only had himself to blame for dying. He shrugged. Sister, there is no need for you to apologize, Jason said in a low voice. She suspected the story was not so simple as Jay depicted it. He only had himself to blame. That sounded ominous. Grace was surprised. She hadn't been expecting him to describe his father's death that way. Jay, I'm not sure what you meant by blaming him, perhaps it was some accident. Was it? I don't think so. He fell in love with someone he shouldn't have fallen in love with, then when she discovered that he was useless, he was cast aside. It didn't matter even if he kneeled down and begged. No. Jason's eyes darkened into an abyss. No, that's not entirely true. The more he groveled and begged, the more she despised him. He shook his head as if clearing thoughts. In the end, he died in despair and had frozen to death in the snow. Ads by Pub Future. Jason's expression was as indifferent as if he was just talking about something as ordinary as the weather, not a man succumbing to hypothermia and dying in it. Even his voice was as calm as usual. But this was his father. Grace felt as if he had returned to the first time she had seen him. He'd been distant then too. And detached. Jay, she called out to him. He looked up, and her face was reflected in his dark pupils. Tell me, he goaded her. Did he not bring it upon himself? She felt her throat dry up as she tried to respond. After a long while, she finally murmured, "Is that woman your mother?" He was silent. There was no expression on his face, but there was a flash of pain in his eyes. And so she knew the answer. She didn't know how to comfort him, feeling that at this moment any words she could provide would be useless. There were some wounds in the world that only people who had actually experienced them could understand the pain. She stood up and hugged him as he stayed atop the chair. His head was leaning against her chest, his nose was inhaling her breath, and her warmth was being transmitted onto his cheeks. All of a sudden, the sound of her heartbeat came into his ears through her clothes. This made him feel like staying in this position forever. Mom, don't go. The thin and short figure was kneeling down on the ground, hoping that the woman, who had already packed up her luggage, would not leave. But it was useless. The woman still insisted on leaving and did not even look back at him. Seeing that his mother was about to leave, the boy wanted to reach out and grab her. But in the next moment, his tiny hand was swung away, and he felt a heart-wrenching pain in his chest. It was so painful, so painful. No one could save him from such pain, and no one could stop his pain. It was so painful that he felt like he was going to suffocate, as if he was going to die. Jai, Jai. A voice was calling out to him. Who was it? Who was calling out to him? Jai, don't worry. It won't hurt anymore. I'm here. I'm here. Don't worry, Jai. The gentle voice was filled with anxiety and worry. Under the sound, the feelings of suffocation and pain within him faded away like a falling tide. He struggled to open his eyes and looked at the delicate woman in front of him. Grace breathed a sigh of relief. That's great. You finally woken up. Woken up. When had he fallen asleep? One moment he'd been in Grace's arms, soaking up her strength and scent. The next, he must have drifted off to sleep and memories seized him. Wait, no, that wasn't entirely right. They'd chatted more after dinner. Then each taken time to wash up and change for bed. He'd lay down on the cot and counted her breaths until she fell asleep. Jason rubbed his eyes, the events of the evening coming back to him in short order. He'd not had a nightmare like this in a long time. In his dream, he had knelt down in front of the woman and begged her. Was it because he had talked about that woman tonight that he had had such a dream? Jason raked a hand through his hair. He exhaled a long breath and lowered his head only to find that the button of his pajamas had been unbuttoned, revealing his chest. "My clothes are." Grace saw the direction of his gaze and she pursed her lips as if she was embarrassed. "Because you were shouting that it adds by pub future hurts so much. I was afraid that something was wrong with your body. So, I just went ahead and unbuttoned your shirt to see if anything was wrong." He stared at her, and her face slowly grew redder. "But I can assure you, I didn't even have the time to look before you woke up, so actually, I didn't see anything," she hurriedly explained. But the more she explained, the odder she sounded. And the brighter her cheeks glowed. "It doesn't matter even if you see. You can look at my body," Jason said. She was blushing so hard, and it was quite adorable, actually. "Your body, does it hurt anymore?" It took her a long time to stutter out the sentence. It doesn't hurt anymore." He lowered his head and began to button up his pajamas. She tried her best to keep her gaze above his neck, but she accidentally caught a glimpse of his chest, and then suddenly pulled down his pajama top again. "Hey, you are hurt." She stared at his chest. There was a scar right above his heart. Although the scar was already faint, Grace could still tell that the wound had definitely not been a minor injury back when he had received it. "What's wrong with you here?" "It's just a small injury," he said in an indifferent manner. She bit her lower lip with her teeth and raised her hand to touch the scar gently. While he had been sleeping, he had been crying out in pain, and her hand had accidentally touched this area. Was he in pain because of this injury? How bad was he hurt back then? Grace felt as if her own heart was being wrenched. "How did you get hurt like this? When did it happen?" she murmured. His body stiffened slightly. It had been many years since he had been injured, and other than the doctors, no one else had touched his wounds. She was the only one. It was as if all the blood in his body was pumping into the area near his heart. Beneath her touch, his heart was beating faster than usual. "It's been a long time. It's no longer painful," he said. She was slightly relieved, and only then did she suddenly notice their current positions seemed to be a little inappropriate. That's good. Hurry up and button up or you'll catch a cold." With a blush on her face, she quickly moved her hand away. All of a sudden, the temperature in his chest seemed to fall, and he suddenly felt empty in his heart. He buttoned up his pajamas slowly. "By the way, when I was dreaming, what else did I say besides crying out?" She hesitated for a moment and said, "You kept shouting, 'Mom, don't go.'" His body stiffened. His hands gradually clenched into fists, and his nails dug into his palms. She looked at him and couldn't help reaching out her hand to touch his cheek. The coldness from his face seeped into her fingertips. "Jay," she called out in a low voice. He slowly raised his head. His eyes looked as empty as they had been when he had spoken to her about his parents. Some wounds never healed. They only festered with time. This man, for as stoic and resolute as he claimed to be, he was still suffering. And it tore at her heart. "Jay," she called out to him, but this time more loudly. "Stay with me." Grace held his face and stared deep into his eyes. The memories were like a wave, sweeping him up and dragging him miles out to sea. He wasn't trying to ignore her, but once he went down this particular path of memories, it was hard to shake all the details and feelings that came rushing in. Because it wasn't just his mother. It was the death of his father. The abuses of his grandfather. The absence of any family or familiarity. Was it any wonder he turned out the way he did? His past had sharpened him into this present man. One who could lie effortlessly and move people around as if life was some chessboard. What's wrong? She asked. It's nothing. Nothing anyone could do or change. That's good. She breathed a sigh of relief. The way you looked just now was like. She thought for a while and came up with a description. It was like a piece of glass that was about to break. You scared me for a moment. Glass. He chuckled and a dark and hostile glint flashed in his eyes, but it disappeared in an instant and his gaze returned to normal. Sister, in this world, no one can break me. Grace dropped her hands from his face. She looked unsteady, as if she was seeing him, but only really seeing him for the first time. Ads by Pub Future. Was she finally sensing that he was not some misshapen man in need of saving? Was she finally seeing that he had appointed himself her protector and he'd destroy anyone that came between them? Why? He didn't even have that answer. And he asked himself the question frequently. As long as you're okay, she whispered. And there it was, the absolute trust. Grace was too smart and too perceptive to think that everything was as simple as it was presented. But she didn't pry. She didn't force him to be anything other than what he claimed to be. Would anyone else have indulged him with his secrets? He didn't think so. He stared at her and asked, Sister, you'll never leave me, right? She smiled and said, Didn't we agree before? You won't leave me, and nor will I leave you. Yes, I just forgot about it, he murmured. He stretched out his arms and held her in his embrace, appreciating her physical existence. Of all the souls on this earth, he was most content with the one beside him right now. She said that she would not leave him, but why did he feel uneasy? Was he afraid that one day when she discovered his true identity, she would desert him? Brother, Jay could stay by her side, but what about Jason Reed? Could he as well? In the living room of the Stevens family, Mr. Stevens asked his son, Sean. Lily said that Jason had his secretary pick you up to meet him. Why did he suddenly want to meet you in private? When he started talking about Jason, Mr. Stevens had a hint of concern in his words. Sean recognized the tone. It was one his father seldom used, and he knew the reason for it. After all, the Stevens family was dealing with the Reed family. Their business was getting worse by the day, and their soon-to-be marriage connection with the Atkinson family would be their ticket back to success. Sean's father was afraid that Jason was prejudiced against the Stevens family, and that this would interfere with the marriage. What did he say? Mr. Stevens pressed again. Nothing much, Sean said. Nothing much because you say so, or because there actually isn't much to tell. I can't believe that, Sean. Why would Jason have his secretary pick you up for no reason? Mr. Stevens asked, angrily. That's right, Sean, his mother said as she entered the room. Lily isn't wrong to contact us. We should have heard about Mr. Reed's visit directly from you. She composed herself. If anything did happen, you can just be honest with us, his mother said. Persuasively, Sean took a deep breath and said, It's really nothing. His father crossed his arms. It had to be something. Quit playing games. Sean could not say it. If Jason Reed were to learn that Sean had told anyone of his relationship with Grace Cummins, Sean had no doubt the retribution would be swift and harsh. Jason Reed did not make idle threats. The old patriarch of the Reed family had been rumored to be a severe man, but Sean felt the true menace was Jason. Jason showed no fear of anyone or anything. And he was so powerful, his reach of influence seemed boundless. Does Jason still have a grudge against the Stevens family? Does he want to take action against us? Mr. Stevens asked. It has nothing to do with the Stevens family, Sean lied. The day Mr. Reed met me, he just talked about my engagement. It was the only excuse he could come up with. He wished us much happiness and success. His parents finally breathed a sigh of relief and their expressions looked better when they heard that. On the other hand, Sean's sister, Zoe, said indignantly, "In the end, it's all because of Grace. If it weren't for her, why would our family be so nervous about this marriage?" Upon saying Grace's name, Zoe felt a belly full of anger. When Grace had caused that car accident back then, she had often heard people in high-end parties talking about how Stephen's family was doomed, and it had caused her much embarrassment. It was not until her brother had started going out with Lily that they had finally stopped talking about it. It took years. She hated Grace for it. "Grace is really a J on our family. Fortunately, you broke up with her when he did. Can you imagine what would have befallen us if you'd stayed with that trash?" Sean sighed. "I heard she's a sanitation worker now. Fitting. How could the judge only sentence her to 3 years in prison? In my opinion, she should have been sentenced to at least 10 or 20. Zoe kept talking about Grace with a disgusted look, but the more she spoke, the more her brother seemed to recoil. "That's enough, Zoe. Don't talk about her anymore. When you see Grace, you'd better behave yourself," Sean said. "Better yet, stay away from her entirely." "Sean, what's wrong with you? I used to talk about her all the time, but you never said anything. Why are you protecting her?" Adds by Pub Future. Now, his parents chose that moment to come back into the room. His mom glanced nervously between him and Zoe. "Sean, don't tell me that you still have feelings for her." When Mr. Stevens heard this, he immediately frowned and said, "Don't even think about it. Grace Cummins is a blight on our name. She shouldn't even think about stepping through the door of this house. I have no feelings for Grace, but she's someone we can't afford to offend. That's all I can say." Sean gritted his teeth. "Can't afford to offend." Zoe scoffed at his words. "Sean, what are you talking about? Grace is a sanitation worker. She's a low life, totally insignificant. Why can't we afford to offend her? Just listen to me. Don't harm the entire Stevens family later because you're too stupid to listen to me now," Sean warned sternly. Mr. Stevens was no fool. He sensed that Sean was choosing his words very carefully. And certainly, his son wasn't acting this way casually. "Sean, what exactly is Grace?" "Dad, there are some things that I can't say. You'd better all be a bit more careful. At least, at this stage, you should give Grace Cummins more respect," Sean said. Sean didn't know why or how Grace could have inserted herself into Jason Reed's life. And as the killer of Jason's former fiancée, it made absolutely no sense. But, at least for the moment, Jason still seemed to consider Grace to be of extraordinary importance. Sean's visit to the Reed family home had proven that. The threat still weighed heavily on him. Mr. Stevens was deep in thought, and Sean's mom wasn't saying anything. Only Zoe curled her lips as if she didn't believe it. "This is bullshit, brother. I don't owe that heinous bitch an ounce of respect. She nearly destroyed this family and you. Do you have feelings for her still? Is that what this is about? Sean, don't be so foolish. Zoe, that is enough." Sean punched his fist through the wall. Jason's gaze fixed on the box of Stomachache medicine on his desk. This was the medicine that Grace had left for him when he felt sick last time. He was fully recovered, and, had she not been so distraught, he wouldn't have taken the prescription in the first place, but he hadn't thrown the medicine away. Instead, he had continued to leave it on the desk. "Terence, what do you think Grace will do if she finds out about my true identity?" Terence froze. He'd been in the process of collecting the contracts and budgetary reports that Jason had approved. He paused and said nothing. "Did you hear me?" Jason asked. Terence nodded. Is it very difficult to answer this question?" Jason raised his eyebrows. It's not difficult, sir. But I don't know if my boss would be willing to accept my answer. I don't need to accept or reject what you say. I simply asked you a question. Terence nodded. Very well. I think that Miss Cummins will feel deceived. Terence took it a step further. She has been subjected to much and is vulnerable. She does not trust most people, and such a betrayal would cut her deeply. Do you think she would still be willing to stay by my side? Jason asked. Terence was slightly surprised. Do you want Miss Cummins to continue to accompany you? Since this was only a game, didn't it mean that the game would come to an end once Mr. Reed told Grace of his true identity? Or could it be that Mr. Reed's feelings for her had grown? Thinking of this, Terence clutched the papers he held. Mr. Reed, you. He opened his mouth in the middle of the sentence, but his words suddenly stuck at the back of his throat. What do you want to say? Speak, Jason ordered. Terence frowned. Mr. Reed, have you fallen in love with Miss Cummins? Terence asked. So, that was why Mr. Reed had always been keen on this game and had secretly done so many things for this woman. It may have begun as a game, but it had morphed into something more. And if Mr. Reed was worrying about the future and whether or not Grace would be with him in it, then his feelings were strong. Jason drew in a deep breath. He had fallen in love. How could that be possible? No, that was not right. And Terence was a fool for even suggesting it. How could he have fallen in love with any woman? Was it not enough to have his father as an example? He would never be so weak or desperate, so pathetic as to be at the mercy of some other person. At most, he liked Grace's company. She was kind and uncomplicated. She kept her questions to herself and didn't desire his company for what she could gain. The woman was, adds by pub future, selfless and patient. Her presence gave him a sense of comfort. That's all it was. Don't say this kind of thing in the future, Jason said coldly. Terence shivered and immediately replied, Yes, sir. Without another word, he bowed and left the office. The lights were intoxicating. Patrick Weiss looked curiously at Jason, who was sitting lazily on the sofa. Jason had never liked to participate in these gatherings, but today, he had made an exception. He leaned over and asked, Why did you want to come here? He and Jason could be considered childhood playmates. They had been classmates throughout middle school and high school. Of course, he knew that this good friend of his had always liked to keep quiet and did not particularly care for social events. In all fairness, most of the time Jason would be bombarded by businessmen seeking his company or women vying for his attention with dollar signs in their eyes. Jason wasn't a partier. He didn't drink to excess. He wasn't someone who cared about being seen at all the new, cool places. Seriously, bro, I invited you only out of habit. I didn't think for a second that you'd actually show. What gives? Jason sipped his drink. Do I need a special reason to come out? Don't you guys ask me all the time to join you? Jason asked. Fair enough. But that was the point, really. They did ask Jason to hang out all the time, and he very seldom said yes. What changed his mind tonight? Jason's answer made sense, but Patrick still felt it was a little strange. At this moment, a gorgeously dressed woman with exquisite makeup walked up to Jason and tried to start up a conversation with him. Patrick thought his good friend would definitely reject her, so it was very unexpected when Jason actually let the woman sit by his side. Patrick's eyes almost popped out of his eye sockets when Jason ordered her a drink. Why was he willing to let a woman get so close to him today? Had the sun risen from the west this morning? Patrick sensibly stepped away and turned to look at his other friend, Brian Hart. Brian was of a similar height but bulkier, and while Patrick was light-hearted, Brian gave Jason a run for the money in the serious department. Well, not with women. When it came to girls, Brian was never seen with the same one twice. Brian stood beside the bar, playing with a silver bracelet on his wrist. Are you seeing this too? Brian laughed. It appears our boy Jason is in quite a mood this evening. That was one way to put it. You think he's turning a corner? Patrick shrugged. This wasn't typical behavior for Jason. On the contrary, if anyone was going to go home with random women, that'd be Brian. Brian's dark eyes glittered as if he was glad to see someone behaving the way he normally did. Brian spun the bracelet on his wrist. Once, twice, again. What is with you and always wearing that silver bracelet? As he spoke, Patrick reached out and tried to grab the silver band. Brian jerked his wrist away, avoiding Patrick's hand. His eyes darkened as he said, "Don't touch it." Patrick titled his head and looked at the person in front of him. If Jason was cold, then Brian was pure ice. For as much as Brian partied and had flings with different women, he was detached. Sometimes, even when they were talking, it seemed like Brian wasn't even in the conversation. Patrick had never seen a woman who could truly occupy his heart. Patrick and his group of friends would often bet on whether Brian's new girlfriend would be the one to end his single life, but anyone who took that bet was destined to lose. The man was living the single life and loving it. Brian was the sort of person who appeared to be courteous to others on the surface, but in reality, he never warmed up to anyone. Patrick had known him long enough to know that Brian didn't even like most people. Sure, Brian played the part and his impeccable manners compelled him to make small talk and be seen with all the right people, but Patrick knew that Brian didn't give two shits for the social scene. For Brian, it was all just a means to an end. Emily, Brian's latest girlfriend, who was also a rising star in the entertainment industry, approached them. She was stunning, but that was to be expected and popular, both within their circles and the larger entertainment community. Of course, this was all thanks to Brian. Brian was the heir to the largest entertainment company in the country, and it was very easy for him to make anyone a star. He'd done it several times. Come to think of it, maybe that was why he had so many girlfriends. Why settle down with one when there was an endless stream of young women seeking fortune and fame? Was it because of that dynamic that Brian didn't take any single one of these women seriously? Patrick didn't know. He did know that Brian had doted on every single one of his girlfriends, but when he stopped caring for them, there was no coming back from the breakup. And the countless magazines and gossip columns in the city were quick to point that out too. Maybe it was the challenge that kept the ladies coming. Patrick shrugged and sipped his drink. He would not leave them any room to compromise. "Brian, I'm sorry I'm late," Emily said gently. When she caught a glimpse of the bracelet in Brian's hand, she visibly paled. It was almost comical how she fixated on that thin, silver bracelet that he was now playing with in his hand, instead of the diamond bracelet and ruby necklace that Patrick saw her wearing, jewelry that Brian had purchased for the young starlet. The jewels she wore were worth close to 10 million. But that small silver bracelet, for some reason the silver bracelet was taboo. He wouldn't even allow her to touch it. Once, when she had tried to examine it, he had stared at her coldly and said, "Believe it or not, but if you're there, you won't be able to use your hands anymore." At that moment, his sharp eyes had been filled with ruthlessness. Patrick recalled the event. It had been painfully awkward. Emily had been so scared that she became rooted on the spot. Brian had ordered them another round of drinks and doted on her as usual, as if he hadn't just threatened her with bodily harm. It was one of the more entertaining nights Patrick had experienced in a long while. Maybe tonight would prove exceptional too. But as he thought it, Brian was tucking the small bracelet back into his pocket. What did the silver bracelet mean to him anyway? It was small, basically the size of a child's wrist. Patrick had known Brian for 15 years, and he still didn't know the significance of it. After Emily sat down, her gaze landed on Jason, who was not far away. She was taken aback. That is, Mr. Reed, right, Mr. Reed. She had only seen him once from afar, so she wasn't Selene. Moreover, Jason seemed to be acting very intimate with another woman. Wasn't it said that Mr. Reed was very cold to women? Yes, it's Jason, Patrick answered her. He smiled and then said to Brian, why don't we make a bet and see if Jason will leave with this woman later? What do you think? There's no need to make a bet, Brian said. Why not? Brian did not answer, but his gaze remained fixed in the direction of Jason. When Patrick turned his head, he realized that Jason had already moved away from that woman without him noticing. That woman seemed to want to get closer, but she did not dare approach again after Jason seemed to have said something. Then, Patrick saw Jason leave without saying another word. Outside the club, Terence looked at Jason and immediately said respectfully, Mr. Reed, let's go. Jason got in the car. Did he come here today to prove something? Jason wasn't sure. He had spent a little time with old friends and business associates. He chatted with several women, and fended off the advances of several more. It had been made clear before that he wouldn't accept just any woman. When he had held the striking woman who went up to talk to him today and smelled her perfume, he had been taken aback. Yes, she was beautiful, wealthy, cultured, but she hadn't stood a chance. When she came close, he had actually been thinking about the faint soapy fragrance of another woman. He even had a sense of disgust when the woman got closer to him. It wasn't so bad that he would have shoved her away or made a scene, but he distinctly did not like her nearness. Indeed, holding another woman in his arms was very different from the feeling of holding her. When he arrived in front of the rental apartment, he squatted down and took out the spare key under the mat in front of the door. He knew that she always liked to put the spare key there, saying that it was in case she forgot to take her key when she left for work. He'd have to break her of that habit. It was dangerous. Whilst he slept in the apartment, it was not a concern, but when she was alone, still on, he pushed open the door. The lights in the room were and her slender figure was sitting next to the table. Half of her upper body was lying on the table, and her head was tilted to the side as she slept. He looked at her sleeping face under the light. Her skin was smooth and her expression serene. She looked so peaceful that his ads by pub future heart seemed to slow the moment he saw her. He raised his hand and gently fiddled with the strands of hair lying over her cheeks, brushing them back and letting his fingers just barely touch her skin. Her skin was so soft. There were women who were more beautiful. Hell, the women at the club he'd just left were actresses and daughters of the most wealthy families in the city. They were perfect, but not a single one of them struck him as graceful. It seemed that he would not get tired of looking at her even if it was for the rest of his life. And that was one hell of a sobering thought. A moment later, he bent down and carefully lifted her from the chair. Even though he deliberately tried to be as gentle as possible, she still woke up. Jai. She opened her eyes in a daze. Her hazy almond eyes crinkled as she smiled at him. Yes, I'm back, he said. I'll take you to bed and you can keep sleeping. As he spoke, he held her in his arms and walked toward the bed. Her head rested in his arms, half asleep and half awake, and she snuggled closer. You smell nice, it's perfume, right? Where have you been? Something happened today, so I went to the bar. I probably got the smell from there. He laid her down on the bed. Go to sleep. I'll go wash the smell off. Her eyelids began to close again. He appreciated that about her too. No recriminations. Not argument. She trusted him. After covering her with a blanket, he took out a clean set of clothes and went to the bathroom. He showered, washed his hair and considered the woman asleep. In the other room, he had no doubt that she'd fallen asleep at that table waiting up for him. He'd probably made her worry. When he dried off and dressed, he opened the door to the main room. The light from behind him bathed Grace so he could see the curve of her face and the delicate shape of her lips. He stayed there for a few minutes, watching her sleep. Then he walked out into the room and bent down slightly, the tip of his nose getting closer to her, and he breathed in her scent. Grace, tell me, when should I let you know of my identity? Or should I let you keep relying on me until you can't leave me anymore? But she did turn toward the sound of his voice, instinctively seeking him, even in her sleep. It had been a long time since Grace got 2 days in a row off, and on a weekend, no less. Normally, she was working overtime and taking whichever shifts she was assigned. Since Grace finally got some rare time off, Lena took her shopping. The two of them had not gone shopping for a long time. Grace because she lacked the time and the money, and Lena because Grace's erratic schedule made planning a shopping trip almost impossible. When they strolled around the mall, Grace felt as if she had momentarily returned to the past when, before the accident, she had been carefree. She'd taken so many things for granted. Money, time, friendships, her freedom. Now, she appreciated each moment. Her life might not be so beautiful or easy or glamorous, but she was appreciative of every minute. Even in her best days before, when she'd graduated at the top of her class, landed Sean and her future had seemed so bright. She had not been so mindful of those things. Lena elbowed her side. All right, this has been going on for months now. Spill. What's the deal with Jay? How much do you know about him now? Before Grace could even answer, Lena was talking. Where is he from? Where's his hometown? What kind of people are in his family? You know, a lot of people can seem nice before they swindle someone, right? This could be one big catfishing trick. Lena, if Jay was looking for someone to scam, he could find someone who actually had something to take. I'm poor. I have a dead-end job. I've neither money nor much going on with my career. Lena waved that away. Tell me about his family. Grace considered saying that she didn't know anything, but that would just make her friend cry more. I only know that his father has already passed away, and his mother seems to have left him. He didn't tell me anything else, and I didn't ask. Grace, adds by Pub Future, shrugged. Are you dumb? That's all you know. You should at least know what he used to do. Lena said. Grace smiled faintly. Why would I need to find out what he used to do? In the past, I thought I knew everything about Sean. Everything from his family background to the schools he attended. I even remembered his license plate and ID numbers very clearly. But in the end, what did it matter? I still couldn't see him for who he really was. Fair. Lena bit her lip. Sorry. What's there to be sorry about? Grace laughed. It's nothing for you to fuss about, anyway. I know you're worried about me, but I really don't care about any of that anymore. Besides, if he doesn't want to tell me and I persist in asking, he may just make up some stories to conceal the truth, and I wouldn't be able to tell, so what's the point of asking? That was one truth that Grace didn't really want to dwell on. She might put forth a good front for Lena, and even for Jay. But she knew he had his secrets. She knew he had a whole life before she entered it. Did it hurt that he didn't want to share things with her? It did. But she understood him, and she recognized a kindred soul that was suffering. Who was she to force him to share his pain? Let's not talk about this. Come, let's go and get some new clothes. Grace didn't actually intend to buy anything, but it seemed a good enough excuse. to get Lena to change the subject. The boss of our design research institute has asked me to wear formal clothes when I meet clients, Lena complained as she pulled Grace into a big designer store. Grace paused. She couldn't afford the clothes in here and she didn't want Lena to try and purchase something for her. Oh, just relax already. I won't force you to buy anything. And I promise not to buy it for you if you are going to have a freak out. Grace arched her brow. I do not freak out. Lena pointed at her. Tell that to your face. You already have that one eyebrow arching up. Lena laughed. I know that look. Grace chuckled and gave in. Besides, it didn't cost anything to try some clothes on. She could pretend and then claim they didn't fit and put them back on the racks. The two women briefly parted as Lena made her way to the formal section of the store. Grace stayed by the entry. She could feel that the lady in the store was looking at her. The cheap clothes on her body looked completely out of place inside this shop. That familiar sense of shame came back. She told herself to not think like this, to not feel like this. She'd done nothing wrong and she had every bit as much right to look around a store as anyone else. Hey, look who it is. Why would someone like you come here? It's simply lowering the grade of this entire establishment. A voice sounded out from the inside of the store. Grace looked up and saw two familiar figures. One of them was Lily, and the other one was Zoe Stevens, Sean's little sister. The two women wore expensive luxury brand clothes and carried famous high-end handbags. There was no mistaking their looks of contempt. In particular, Zoe's nose went up in the air and her lips curled in an ugly snarl. There had been a time when she would have said that she'd like Zoe Stevens. But to see her now, it was as if the young woman wished her dead. When the staff at the counter saw Zoe and Lily, they immediately greeted them enthusiastically. Miss Atkinson, Miss Stevens, a new batch of clothes has recently arrived. Come, let us bring the fall lines out for you. The manager, a man in his 30s, snapped his fingers. Champagne for the ladies. Please take a look to see if there are any clothes that you like. Some of them came straight from the Milan fashion show. Sure, why not? Zoe said before smiling at Grace with malice. She accepted a flute of champagne. Grace, do you want to try on clothes as well? Oh, wait, I think with your current salary, even if you were to save up for a year, you wouldn't be able to afford the things here. How could a mere sanitation worker dare to enter here? When the other staff members heard the words, sanitation worker, they all looked at Grace in surprise, and their gazes also started to fill with contempt. Grace's face heated with embarrassment. What's wrong with sanitation workers? Lena asked. She had been checking out the clothes on the shelves at the other end of the store. When she noticed the commotion, she rushed to Zoe and said, which law states that sanitation workers are not allowed to enter this shop to look at clothes? But can she even afford them? Zoe said disdainfully, Grace is just a street cleaner, but you want to come to this store to check out the clothes. You just want to make trouble, don't you? As she spoke, she looked at the staff next to her. Shouldn't those who deliberately make trouble in the store be asked to leave? Zoe was a frequent visitor here. The staff usually fawned on this young lady of the Stevens family, so the supervisor immediately walked over to Grace and Lena and said, if you're not planning on buying anything, then you need to leave. Now, who says we can't afford to buy something? I can. Lena was about to bite the bullet and just buy an outfit to vent her anger and make the staff stop looking down upon them. Grace held her back in time and said to the senior staff, can't we just have a look in the store? You two have come to a store which is far out of your income range. You might be here to make trouble, and it is my job to protect the rights of the other guests in the store. The supervisor acted as if he was being reasonable. Grace responded directly, but you don't have any evidence against us. In fact, you are clearly discriminating against us, for no good reason. By the way, what you just said. She held her phone and waved it for good measure. I have already recorded it. I think this should work as a good piece of evidence for me to hand over to the management of the mall. Up, you. The supervisor's face immediately turned red. He had never thought that the other party would record his words. Grace, that's enough, Zoe scolded. You are someone who sweeps the streets. Why would you come here to shop? Do you still miss the days when you got to wear this kind of thing? Zoe said mockingly, if you really want these clothes, then I can take pity on you and buy something for you. Why can't a sanitation worker come here to look around and shop for clothes? Or does the Stevens family think that sanitation workers are inferior to others? If the public knows that the Stevens family looks at sanitation workers in this way, I'm not sure how they will feel about it. Grace said her words in a neutral tone. She wasn't making a threat so much as stating a fact. Zoe's personal behavior was a reflection on the Stevens family. Zoe sputtered, but she didn't go so far as to refute what Grace said, probably because she knew Grace was right and she didn't have any argument. Zoe held her tongue, only because if it really did leak what she'd said, and somehow it flowed out onto social media that she'd said that sanitation workers were inferior, then she would probably get flamed to death on the internet before the end of tomorrow. And it wouldn't just be her, but the whole family too. Why do you have to be so serious? Lily, who had been silent throughout, suddenly said. Grace barely masked her surprise. Lily was the last person she'd expect to come to her defense. Lily smiled coldly and went on. Sanitation workers can certainly buy clothes here, but as with any store, if one isn't actually making purchases, they shouldn't loiter. That's an impediment to store owners. If you aren't going to buy anything, then don't interfere with other people's business. From the sparkle in her eye, Lily thought she'd scored the last word, and already she could see the store manager perking up. Like that bit about loitering was the key to proving his innocence. But Grace wasn't ready to be thrown out just yet. This one is fine. Grace directly pointed at a dress with a price tag of $4 million. It was a one-of-kind couture gown and the designer's name was valued around the world. It was a true showpiece. Didn't Miss Stevens just say that she wanted to buy a dress for me? Then let's just get this one. Zoe almost spat blood. She despised Grace's comments. And she might have been being catty to say that she'd buy Grace something. But she didn't mean it. Miss Stevens, you're not going to go back on your words, are you? Lena asked. She smiled and stepped closer to Grace. Zoe's face turned even redder. Lily said disdainfully, it's not that Zoe can't afford to pay for the gown. It's just that buying something like this for a murderer is not worth it. Grace's face went as white as a sheet of paper. Lena stepped in front of her. Who are you calling a murderer? Lena snarled. Why does she not even dare to admit that she killed my sister? Lily stared straight at Grace. Grace pressed her lips together tightly. The scene of the car accident flashed across her mind again. If she had been a step slower at that time, she might have died in the explosion of the car crash as well. I didn't. She met the other person's gaze and spat out these two words. Liar. Lily sneered. The verdict has already been passed. Weren't you talking all high and mighty about some evidence just now? You have to realize that all the evidence back then pointed at you. Grace's eyes watered. It was true. No matter how hard she tried to defend herself, all the evidence really did point at her. It was obvious that she had been framed, but no one believed her except Lena. Lena, let's go, Grace said. She grabbed her friend and spun to walk them out of the store. And she slammed directly into Sean, who was on his way. Sean was stunned. Grace. When Zoe saw her brother, she immediately went forward and complained, "Brother, you have no idea how shameless this bitch was just now. She asked me to buy her a dress worth millions. She doesn't realize that she isn't even fit to wear such a dress." "Shut your mouth." Sean scolded her on the spot, and his expression turned ugly. Was his sister not afraid of anything? The person backing Grace was none other than Jason Reed. The man was a billionaire. Forget about a dress that cost millions. There wasn't an object in this world that Jason Reed couldn't afford. "Brother, what's wrong with you? Why are you raising your voice at me?" "I'm talking about Grace," Zoe argued. "She's a friggin' convict. What's there to say?" Sean said grumpily. He couldn't reveal the truths that he knew about Grace's true patron. And he couldn't afford to humiliate her and chance it getting back to Jason Reed. Sean turned to the clerk next to him and said, "Pack up that dress." His sudden words shocked everyone in the store. "Sean, what are you doing? Are you going to give the dress to Grace?" Zoe asked in disbelief. "Seriously." As for Lily, her lips pressed into a thin line and her eyes narrowed in unmasked anger. On the other hand, the salesgirl looked pleasantly surprised. She could earn a lot of commission if the sale went through. "Grace, I'm sorry." Zoe's words were a bit rude, but she didn't mean any harm. "Please don't hold a grudge against her. This dress, here, just take it as an apology." Sean's tone was extremely humble. Zoe looked at her brother in disbelief. "Brother, what gives her the right to make you gift her a dress? And we're even apologizing to her now. Who does she think she is?" The more Zoe spoke, the more Sean worried. Damn it, his sister needed to shut up. She had no idea of the consequences. If Grace said something in front of Jason Reed, he could obliterate all of the Stevens family holdings. "Enough, Zoe," he turned to his ex. "Grace, you won't take offense to what Zoe's saying, right?" Sean raked a hand through his hair. This whole situation was embarrassing, and that didn't even begin to describe the daggers that Lily was all but shooting at him. He made it a point not to look at her. Grace's brows drew together. She wasn't a stupid woman, and she had to be wondering why he'd go out of his way to defend her or to make his own sister apologize. Grace's eyes lit up, and Sean could pinpoint the moment when she realized she had the upper hand. Grace pursed her lips and said, "You know, you're right, I don't need that dress." Zoe all but crowed, as if by rejecting the dress, Grace was proving all the other things Zoe'd said were right. Grace tapped her lips. "You don't need to give me the dress. Just give me cash. Mr. Stevens, you should have a checkbook on you, right?" She knew that Sean had the habit of bringing a checkbook along with him. Sean was obviously stunned for a moment, but even though he recovered fairly quickly, he didn't react in time to control his sister. "You bitch." Zoe glared at Grace with hatred. "How dare you ask for money? Why wouldn't I? Miss Stevens, didn't you say that you would buy me something from the store? I'm just exchanging it for cash. Nothing more," Grace said. Grace had been playing a bluff with every intention of letting Sean beg off and drag his deplorable sister and fiancée out of the store with him. "You're crazy for money, aren't you?" Zoe shook her head with disgust. "Don't think my brother will." However, by this time, Sean had already taken out the checkbook, filled out the amount, and handed it directly to Grace. "Brother," Zoe shouted. "Enough. You already promised earlier, it's only natural that you keep your word. I'm helping you fulfill the promise." Sean turned to Grace and forced a smile. "Here, this check is for you." Grace took the check and left the store with Lena. There was cursing and muttering, and she could only imagine how the store personnel would gossip, and she didn't care. She'd meant to get under their skin. It was petty and unnecessary, and she'd only wanted Sean to feel shameful for A few brief seconds. But he'd called her bluff and carried through with it. And Sean wasn't a wealthy man by accident. He was very stingy when he wasn't trying to outdo himself for appearances. Grace, don't you think it's a little weird? As soon as they walked out of the store, Lena said, Sean wrote you a huge check and gave it to you without hesitation. Lily was present too. Isn't he afraid his fiancée will lose her shit? It is quite strange, Grace said neutrally. Oh, does Sean still like you? Lena ventured. Grace shrugged. No, I don't think that's it. Grace, he just spent an obscene amount of money on you. True, but I don't think it's affection that prompted it. I don't even think it's ego. Sean's too cheap for that. I think it's fear. It seems that he is afraid that I will get mad at Zoe and then do harm to the Stevens family. Grace voiced her intuitive speculations. Hearing this, Lena thought it was a bit ridiculous. Isn't he thinking too much into it? Who knows? Grace shrugged and raised her hand to look at the check she was holding. What are you going to do with that anyway? Are you going to tear it up? She asked. Don't get me wrong, I'd love to see you. Ads by Pub Future. Spend it on yourself. It's the least that piece of shit can do, after how he and that trash Lily treated you. But something tells me you won't be taking that to the bank. No, I won't. Lena shook her head. You're just going to tear it up. She was incredulous. No, why tear it up? I'll just donate it to someone who needs it, Grace answered and carefully put the check into her bag. Lena beamed. That's more like it. Then she sighed. That prick will probably use it as a tax write-off. Both women laughed, and just like that, the painfulness of that encounter was forgotten. They had a meal after walking around for a while, and shared several small dishes in the mall food court. It was so much like old times. Grace could almost imagine that the last few years hadn't happened, and it was just the two of them catching up after a long week of corporate work. But there was no undoing the past. And seeing how she wouldn't be who she was now, stronger and more self-aware, she didn't resent it. If not for everything in the past, she wouldn't have come to know Jai. Today, let's head back, Grace said. She had saved half her food and the full baklava dessert for Jai. She was eager to take it home to him. When they were about to enter the escalator to the underground parking lot, they saw Sean, Zoe, and Lily again. Ugh, these people were like a bad rash that just wouldn't go away. The trio looked miserable, various expressions of anger, disbelief, and good old-fashioned hatred. They all stopped talking when they saw Grace and Lena approaching the escalator. Grace had a moment's pause where she almost held Lena back and suggested that they walk around the long way, but she didn't want to appear weak. She followed Lena's lead, lifting her head and keeping her eyes straight ahead. Zoe glared and shook her head. Don't even think about it, sister, Sean warned. If you so much as say another word to her again, I'll have you sent abroad. Zoe couldn't believe it. You'd punish me for this murderous bitch. As Grace walked quicker toward the escalator and was about to pass by them, Zoe suddenly stretched out her foot right in Grace's path. Grace was caught off guard and tripped. She pitched forward, and the moving steps caused her to tumble and fall. Lena screamed in shock and quickly ran to the side of the escalator to press the emergency stop button. Even so, it was already too late. Grace had rolled down a lot of steps. Lena raced down the stairs. Are you okay? Can you move? Tell me what hurts. Before Grace could reply, Lena was screaming up to the top floor at Zoe. Do you know that you could have killed her? Zoe put a hand to her chest as if she couldn't believe that someone would say such a thing. She walked without looking where she was going and insisted on hitting my foot. It's all her fault that she fell. Don't bullshit me, Lena screamed. We'll find out the moment we take a look at the security camera recording, Lena said angrily. And I swear to God if she's hurt, I'm pressing charges. She then looked nervously at Grace and said, Grace, are you okay? It hurts. Grace gasped from the pain. She was in shock and her heart was pounding. Every bone seemed to ache and she worried that she might have broken something. I'll take you to the hospital right now, Lena said hurriedly. You just fell down some steps and you are going to go to the hospital. You're really making a big deal out of nothing. Are you going to ask me for medical reimbursement next? Zoe said sarcastically. But no one had expected that in the next moment Zoe's face would be slapped so viciously that she would almost fall from the escalator step herself. Brother. Zoe held her face with her hands and looked at Sean in disbelief. Sean's face was merciless. Apologize. Apologize to Grace right now. Why should I apologize? Zoe said angrily. She rubbed her face and stepped near her brother as if intending to shove him down the escalator next. At this moment, people came over one after another. One of them recognized Lily. After all, she was a popular star. Although she was wearing sunglasses and a hat that covered most of her face, she was still spotted. A crowd began to form. It's Lily. Is that her fiancé next to her? What are they doing here? What's wrong with the escalator? Did something happen just now? Voices sounded around them. Lena helped Grace walk down the escalator. Seeing this, Sean hurriedly caught up with them. 7994. Lily's eyes flashed with surprise. She hadn't expected Sean to leave her behind and run after Grace. And the people around her began to spread gossip. Ads by Pub Future. Lily's fiancé went to chase after another woman. Oh my God, is this a bloody love triangle? Lily's face flushed with embarrassment. She watched Sean reach Grace and Lena at the bottom of the escalator and she weighed whether to follow. Grace Cummins had killed her sister. No, she would not be checking to ensure that Grace was okay. Lily, Zoe whispered. We should go. Dozens of people had their phones out and were closing in on them. Lily managed a coy smile as she and Zoe held on to each other and hurried away. She covered her face with her hands and tried her best to avoid the cameras on the phones as they cut through the crowd. Sean caught up to Grace. How much were your medical expenses? I'll cover it. Zoe didn't mean it. Let's just keep this between ourselves. We can talk. Talk about what? Lena asked indignantly. Sean, how dare you say that your sister didn't do it on purpose? You're Steven's family. People are truly one of a kind. As she spoke, she opened the door, let her friend sit in the front passenger seat, and then sat in the driver's seat herself. Sean had still been knocking on the door, and his face was pale. When he spoke, his voice was trembling. At this time, even Lena could feel that Sean was scared. However, what was he afraid of? Was he afraid that Grace would sue Zoe? Even if they were to take the case to court, Zoe would only have to pay some compensation. The Stevens family wouldn't care about much money. When Lena drove away with Grace, Sean stood rooted to the spot with only the words, I'm done for, repeating over and over in his mind. No matter what the relationship between Jason and Grace was, at least for the moment, Jason seemed to have a special connection to Grace. Since Grace had been injured, and it was because of Zoe, then the Stevens family was responsible. And Jason Reed had the power, wealth and connections to bury them. Damn it. Zoe couldn't refrain from being a bitch for a few minutes. Was it really that hard to take the high road? Sean calculated scenarios. How far would Jason Reed go? Would he really extend himself in such a way? Sean didn't know. And he didn't want to find out. Lena drove Grace to the hospital, registered at the front desk, and then waited in line. Although Grace didn't say anything, Lena could tell from her expression that she was in great pain. However, She didn't know when her good friend had stopped crying out in pain in front of others. Was it because of those days in prison? Had she already suffered so much that she would no longer cry out in pain? Thinking of the strange accident, Lena felt that things were not so simple, but she had no evidence to support her postulation. Seeing her good friend take out her phone, Lena asked, "Who are you calling?" Grace found the name, Jay, in her contact list on her phone and called his number. After a while, the call connected and Jay's voice came from the other end of the line. "Hello, I have something to do. I'm afraid that I will be back late today." You can prepare dinner for yourself," Grace said. "What do you mean, you have something to do?" "Just tell him that you are in the hospital right now," Lena interrupted. "What does she mean you are in the hospital right now?" There was a pronounced change in Jay's tone. "I took a fall, and now I'm waiting for X-rays." "In the hospital," Jay said as if confirming. "Yes," Grace sighed. "Which hospital?" Jay asked. "I'm coming now. You don't have to come. Lena is here with me. Just wait for me at home," she said in a hurry. "I'll be there as soon as I can." The other end of the phone was silent. After a long minute, Jason repeated his previous question, "Which hospital?" Grace bit her lip and replied, "First City." Chills racked her body and her stomach dipped at the thought of inconveniencing him. She had lost her mother when she was a child, and her family had kept her at arm's length for most of her adolescence. Prison, that had shown her that she was truly on her own. Grace really didn't feel comfortable troubling others for anything. No one owed her anything. And she was capable of handling life's issues on her own. Well, mostly. If it weren't for Lena, she would have come to the hospital alone without saying a word to anyone. It wasn't that she thought she'd broken any bones, but she'd hit her head really hard. Everything ached and she was terrified that she was internally bleeding. "I'm coming now," Jason said. Jason hung up the phone and immediately dialed his secretary Terence. "Investigate what happened to Grace today." "Yes, sir. As you wish," Lawrence said. "Also, check who the most skilled orthopedic doctor is at First City Hospital. Make sure he is on call and have him check on Grace's condition," Jason said. "I expect a report before I arrive there." "Understood, sir," Terence answered again. After this call, Terence looked at his mobile phone in a daze. Mr. Reed's feelings for this woman were escalating. His instructions were precise and he knew Mr. Reed's moods and tone well enough to interpret that Jason was deadly serious. There would be hell to pay if his instructions were not followed to the T. Terence thought of the way Mr. Reed had initially reacted to Grace's comments. He'd helped her much as he would any stranger on the street. Then he'd accepted her kindness and spent the night with her. He gradually spent more time at that apartment until he'd virtually moved into that economy rental. Where first, when Grace had been hit by an electric bike, Jason had been slightly shaken. Now, he was calling in every favor and demanding to know every detail of her accident and her treatment. And that wasn't counting the slights against her that Mr. Reed had retaliated on her behalf. Indeed, he was waging an all-out war with anyone who dared to hurt this young woman. The same woman who'd killed his fiancée. It was unsettling. Mr. Reed was calculating, cold. He didn't exhibit any strong emotions for anyone or anything. Not his former future wife, not even his family. His behavior now was most interesting. Just as Grace was waiting for the results of an X-ray scan, a nurse suddenly came over and wheeled her out of the shed space in the air into a private wing of the hospital. The rooms were single bed, spacious, and the entire look of the area reflected a higher quality. Grace asked, "Why have you brought me here?" "Doctor Ha was already treating me." The nurse just shrugged. "I was told to bring you to Dr. Craig. The young man smiled. He's the best there is, so I wouldn't complain. You're lucky. He's usually off today. Grace was rolled into a nice room with a big window. Everything was white and bright and looked very modern and clean. A large television was up on one wall and two couches. On the opposite side of the room, the hospital bed had scarcely stopped rolling before a middle-aged man entered the room and grabbed Grace's chart off the rack at the foot of the bed. "Hello," he said, although he was looking at the chart, not at Grace. "Hello, doctor," Grace said carefully. The nurse smiled and left the room. Dr. Craigie had been awakened by the hospital director and ordered to return to the hospital immediately. He was the senior attending physician and he knew that such a call would not have been made lightly. There were plenty of other top orthopedic surgeons he should know. He'd interviewed and hired them. While under the guise of reading the chart, Craigie took stock of his patient. Her clothes were simple, cheap even. They'd removed her top and put her in a hospital gown, but her pants and shoes were worn. Not dirty, just showing signs of use. The fabric faded. The woman herself was of average weight and height. Her eyes were clear and her hair clean, if not simply styled. She wore no makeup, no jewelry. Her chart revealed disturbing things. Interesting. Don't make any mistakes, the hospital director had said. As if Dr. Craigie would. He didn't need a threat to inspire him to bring his A game. He'd been called in, like this a few times before, for politicians and business chairmen. The girl didn't appear to be anyone of consequence. Not that it mattered. She was his patient now. As a doctor, he did not care about whether the patient was important or not. Wealthy or not. There was an injured human in front of him, and he'd do. Jason strode into the hospital room. His gaze swept the space, taking in the machines beeping, the X-rays mounted on the wall, and the physician standing quietly at Grace's bedside. "You're here," Grace said. "There was a traffic jam on the highway, or I would have been here sooner," Jason replied. She smiled. "You arrived faster than I expected." She picked at the bedsheets. "I hate that I inconvenienced you." Jason moved to the opposite side of the hospital bed to engage the physician directly. Lena returned to the room and handed Grace a small cup of water. "1 second you were in the air, the next you were gone." "Sorry, Grace. It took me a minute to devise where they'd moved you to." "I'm fine," Grace said easily. She sipped the water. "Doctor, how is she?" Lena asked. "Is my friend all right?" She was knocked down several steps by someone on the escalator. Grace watched Jason as Lena relayed the events. She wasn't too happy with her friend for saying all of that. A muscle in Jason's jaw started to tick. "The injury is not too serious," the doctor said. "Thankfully, there is no internal hemorrhaging or any signs of TBI. Traumatic brain injury." Lena sighed loudly in relief. "What did you discover?" Jason asked in a deadly calm voice. Dr. Craigie turned back to him. "There are some slight fractures. We'll put her foot in a brace, and she should stay off it for a few weeks to allow the bones around her ankle to heal." "But," Dr. Craigie hesitated. "But what?" Jason asked in a frigid tone. Grace trembled. "There are injuries that would point to more sustained, systemic trauma." He gestured toward the X-rays of her hands. "You sustained multiple broken bones and fractures. Many of these injuries to your fingers did not set properly, and at this stage, it's unlikely given the bone fusion and time lapse that re-breaking and resetting the bones would affect any positive change." Grace lowered her gaze. The doctor cleared his throat. "I've noticed a number of areas on your hands, arms, feet and legs that point to significant adds by future trauma." Grace pressed her lips together. She knew damn well who and what had caused her those injuries. And the doctor, it seemed like he was digging for information. He probably thought her an abused woman. And she had been. Just not by some wild husband or family member. Grace's injuries had come in the form of retaliation and on behalf of wealthy families. What is the prognosis on the older injuries? Jason asked carefully. Again, his voice was interlaced with hostility. It's hard to say, Drive. Craig Gay admitted. In my professional opinion, given the traumas and how they healed, there will be complications. Perhaps if Miss Cummins had sustained suitable care at the time, the conversation would be different. Now, complications. Grace frowned. But I don't think there's anything wrong with my body. You are still young now, so the effects will be less pronounced, and you properly adapted to the pain. But injuries like this can play into degenerative issues, so as you age, the complications will slowly come out. What kind of complications? Jason asked bluntly. In the future, you may often feel pain in your joints. There will most certainly be arthritis. You may have sustained nerve damage or cramping. If it is serious, you may not be able to lift heavy things with your hands, and you might have trouble walking, drive. Craig Gay said. Grace stayed silent, looking down at her hands and feet. Her old wounds were from her time in prison. Prisoners were afforded the minimal treatment required by law. There were no gifted surgeons to reset her bones. Her fingers were put in soft splints and taped. Yes, the attacks had been painful, and the time spent recovering from them even more so. Even now, her bones and joints ached. So no doubt, what the doctor said about residual pain and worsening, debilitating injuries. Over time, it all made sense. Then, is there any way to cure it? Lena's voice trembled as she asked. On the contrary, Grace seemed to be relatively quiet. You mainly need to recuperate and eat food that's high in calcium. Osteoporosis later in life would compound these issues significantly. Eat foods that reduce swelling and inflammation. Take vitamins and minerals. Also, you have to take good care of yourself. You can't afford to continue to abuse your body, drive. Craig Gay said. Grace leaned back and was lost to her thoughts after that. These last few years, it seemed all she had known was abuse. Being out of prison, she'd been accosted by her own sister, by friends of Sean and even his sister and fiancé. Would she ever know any peace? She can stay a few days and we can monitor her, drive. Craig Gay was saying. I want to go home. Grace, I think you should listen to the doctor, Jason said. I will, she agreed. I'll take it easy and rest. Please, I just want to go home. Jason gave a barely perceptible nod. Lena, Jason said, please work with Dr. Craig Gay to determine any medicines Grace will need and what follow-up treatments he recommends. Grace held out her arms to Jay and he carefully, gently helped her to rise from the bed. Lena remained in the room to obtain the prescriptions and Jason guided Grace into the hallway. When she winced, he sat her in the nearest chair. This is ridiculous. Go back to that hospital bed and rest. Her eyes watered. I don't want to stay here. Please. He muttered a curse. I probably can't just walk out of here. Grace rubbed her head. I'm sure there will be paperwork, and I'll have to go on a payment plan. The county offers insurance, but I don't think it'll cover a fraction of this. Let's not worry about that now, Jason said. Does it hurt? He asked. Actually, it's not that bad. Grace drew her sweater over her hospital gown and buttoned it. My ankle aches, but honestly, I've had worse. You heard the doctor. He said that it'll only take a few weeks to heal. Jason pressed his lips together. The old wounds that the doctor mentioned, did you get them while in prison? Grace pretended to be relaxed and smiled. I was beaten in prison several times, but it wasn't serious. Jason cursed again. Truly, it's not a big deal. I think the doctor was being a bit dramatic. I'll be fine. some vitamins, some rest, and these old wounds will be a thing of the past. The calmer she was, the angrier Jay became. Sister, do you hate the person who put you in prison? He suddenly asked. She laughed a little. Who would I hate? Should I hate the judge, the Atkinson family, or the Stevens family that has been unwilling to help me? Or maybe I should hate Jason Reed himself, right? Because really, he's the root of everything. When she said his name, Jason's whole body stiffened. Do you hate Jason Reed? He murmured. She sighed and said, everyone in this city knows him. When I had the car accident, Jennifer Atkinson was Jason's fiancée. So, of course, I was not going to get out of it easily. How many people want to curry favor with him? How many people think that by hurting me it'll gain them favor with him? Grace's eyes took on a faraway look. Who knows, maybe, if that accident had involved someone else, someone other than Jennifer Atkinson, I could have won the lawsuit. Would I have been spared from being in jail for 3 years and experienced all those things? Maybe. Her eyes were so earnest when they met his. I didn't drink and drive, Jay. I wouldn't do that. I still can't understand how the evidence could corroborate that sort of thing. Jason knew the ins and outs of the case intimately. She was not angry or sad, but the faint self-degradation she showed made him feel very guilty. Perhaps half of her pain was because of him. He squatted in front of her, staring at her bent hands. If I had known that you would suffer so much, I would have protected you 3 years ago. This sentence had nothing to do with the game but was something that had come from the bottom of his heart. Ads by Pub Future. He hated thinking that this woman had suffered because of him. He was cold, yes, but he also considered himself fair. He wasn't cruel. And Grace had been tortured for no other reason than that he might bestow some favors on her tormentors. The thought sickened him. Back then, he hadn't cared one way or the other. But now that he knew her, that he believed her when she said it was all an accident, it opened something in his chest that made him ache with regret. I know that you would have defended me, Grace said. She patted his hand. All right, let's not talk about this. Grace smiled again and lifted her hand to rub his dark hair. It seemed that she had been doing this more and more frequently recently. Lena entered the hallway and paused beside them. She shifted her feet awkwardly. Got the medicine, she said. To the two of them. And Dr. Craig Gay included 2 other prescriptions which we can fill once we get you home. Thank you, Lena, Grace said. I'll go get the car from the underground parking lot. Jay, help Grace to the entrance and wait for me. All right, Jason agreed. He slid his arms beneath her legs. Jay, what are you doing? It should be obvious, no. They have wheelchairs, you don't need to carry me. The walking boot they give you won't suffice. You should probably have crutches. He hefted her into his arms and moved like he intended to carry her back into the hospital room to argue for said crutches from the doctor. No, Grace said. I'm fine. I just need some rest. Exactly, Jason agreed. That means rest from walking, he said simply, as if it explained everything. I'm too heavy for you to carry me like this. Jason laughed. Don't be absurd. You hardly weigh anything. It's true. He noticed that the other night too, when he lifted her from the table and moved her to the bed. She tensed in his arms. Relax, Grace, he whispered. I won't drop you. I know, she said. Then she rested her head against his chest. Jason felt his heartbeat pick up. Her scent, her nearness. Knowing she was all right when he'd been left thinking the worst, it all sent the blood in his body rushing to his head. Jason's eyes were filled with a tenderness that he didn't even know was there. Grace lifted one hand around his neck and clung to him. He lifted her higher, held her closer. His lips brushed the top of her head. Thank you for coming for me, Jai. He made some non-committal sound and then walked out of the emergency room and headed for the hospital entrance.